If you've been reading headlines lately, you'd think the EV market is collapsing. Sales are down, the experiment has failed, Americans have spoken. Except that's not what the data says, not even close. Here's 2024 versus 2025. Total U.S. vehicle sales, up 2.8%. That's 441,000 more vehicles sold. EV sales, down 5.9%. That's 88,000 fewer EVs, but here's the part they don't mention. Non-EV sales grew by 529,000 units. The market got bigger. EVs took a smaller slice, but the pie expanded. So when you hear EV sales collapsed, what's actually happened is the overall market grew and conventional vehicles captured more of that growth after federal EV incentives expired. So let's zoom out. In 2010, the U.S. sold 345 electric vehicles. That's 345. By 2025, the number is 1.41 million. That's 4,000 times growth in 15 years. EV market share went from basically zero to 8.7% of all vehicles sold. Yes, 2025 saw the first decline since 2019, but calling this a collapse ignores that we're still selling more EVs annually than the entire U.S. vehicle market sold in 2009 during the financial crisis. But let's not let the facts get in the way. Here's where the misleading narrative comes from. Q4 2025 EV sales dropped 20% from Q3, but Q3 was an artificial spike. The federal $7,500 tax credit was expiring, so buyers rushed in to claim it before it disappeared. Q3 set an all-time EV sales record in the United States, 438,000 units in one quarter. Then the tax credit expired, and Q4 returned to the baseline. This isn't a market rejection, this is Econ 101. If you prop something up by letting people keep their tax money, demand will go up. But if you remove that tax credit, demand will normalize. And here's the kicker. The entire Q4 market weakened, not just EVs, total vehicle sales. They dropped. Retail sales fell 5% in December. So it was not an EV problem, it was a market-wide slowdown. Want to know the actual structural shift in the U.S. vehicle market? It's not about EVs. 81% of vehicles sold in America are now light trucks, SUVs, small pickups, and crossovers. Only 19% are passenger cars. Sedans are basically extinct. This matters because light trucks get worse fuel economy and produce more emissions than gas cars. The shift from sedans to SUVs has a bigger climate impact than EV adoption rates. But that doesn't fit the culture war narrative, so the media ignores it. They'd rather argue about whether EVs are failing rather than to discuss why Americans are driving progressively larger, heavier, and less efficient vehicles. So here's the reality. U.S. vehicle sales grew in 2025. EV sales dipped after incentives expired, predictably. And the market absorbed it without a blink because conventional vehicles more than fill the gap. The story isn't EVs are dying. The story is federal policy actually works, and when you remove it, behavior changes. Next up, we're going to talk about global EV sales. Because while US EV sales plateaued, the rest of the world is accelerating. In part one, we showed you that the US EV market plateaued in 2025 after federal incentives expired. But zoom out to the global picture and you'll see something completely different. While America hit the brakes, the rest of the world basically floored it. Global EV sales hit 18.5 million units through just November, up 21% year over year. China alone sold 11.6 million EVs. That's more than the US sold in total vehicles. Europe surged 33%, 3.8 million EVs sold. North America, down 1%. We're the only major market moving backwards, and the rest of the world, emerging markets, Latin America, Southeast Asia, grew 48%. They're leapfrogging straight to electric. Let's talk about China. In 2024, they sold 11 million new energy vehicles. That's EVs plus plug-in hybrids. Nearly 50% of all cars sold in China are now electric. 50%. For context, the US is at 8.7% market share. China is 6 times ahead of us, and BYD just became the world's largest EV manufacturer, selling 4.54 million vehicles in 2025. Tesla sold a paltry 1.8 million. BYD outsold them by 2.7 million units, more than the entire US EV market. 8 of the world's top 10 best-selling EV models are now Chinese. This isn't a race anymore. China has actually lapped the field. Europe posted a 33% EV growth in 2025, 3.8 million units sold through November. France rebounded after subsidy cuts, thanks to a leasing social program that helps low-income households afford EVs. Italy hit record sales in November, nearly 25,000 units, after launching incentives to replace old gas cars. And even Germany, which had a rough 2024, is recovering. What's the difference? European governments treat EVs as infrastructure policy, not a culture war. They subsidize, they build charging networks, they set deadlines for phasing out combustion engines. And it is working. Here's the uncomfortable truth. North America is the only major market where EV sales declined in 2025. Not because EVs don't work, not because consumers don't want them, but because we removed the incentives and made them less competitive on price. Meanwhile, China is at 50% EV market penetration. Europe is accelerating. Emerging markets are skipping gas entirely and going straight to electric. The US isn't leading the energy transition. We're not even keeping up. We're falling behind while claiming EVs are a failed experiment. That narrative only works if you ignore the other 7.5 billion people who live on this planet. So when you hear EV sales are down, remember, they're only down in one place. Everywhere else on Earth, sales are expanding rapidly. China's building the future. Europe's investing in it. Emerging markets are adopting it faster than anyone predicted. And the US, we're still arguing about whether climate change is real while the rest of the world builds the industries that will power the next century. Which now brings us to part 3, the Venezuela oil story. Now this part's going to be hard for a lot of people to absorb because it's facts, and facts tend to confuse people. The United States just seized control of Venezuela's oil exports. The official story from Washington, we're stopping oil from reaching China. The real story, it's a handout to American oil companies guised as national security. And the kicker, China doesn't even need Venezuelan oil anymore. And let me show you why. Here's the story you've been told. The U.S. is seizing Venezuelan oil tankers and imposing sanctions to keep that oil away from China, from Russia, and even Iran. We're told this is about national security and preventing our adversaries from fueling their economies. Sounds reasonable. right? Except it falls apart the moment you look at where China's at and what China's actually doing with energy. In March of 2025, China's wind and solar capacity hit 1,482 gigawatts, more than their entire fossil fuel capacity for the first time in history. Renewable energy today now accounts for 56% of China's total installed power capacity. Nearly half of all cars sold in China are electric. 11 million EVs sold in 2024 alone. And here's the big one. China's fossil fuel power output is declining for the first time in over a decade. They're not just talking about transition away from oil, they're actually doing it. So when the US claims we need to stop China from getting Venezuelan oil, China's already moving on. They're electrifying transportation, building renewable capacity faster than any country in history, and reducing their oil dependency. Venezuelan oil isn't a strategic asset for China anymore. It's a legacy commodity that they're actively phasing out. So if China doesn't need Venezuelan oil, who does? Here's the surprise answer. American oil companies. Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves. And guess who gets to develop them now that the US has stabilized the situation? Chevron already had a license to operate in Venezuela. Now with Maduro gone and US control established, American oil companies get preferential access to those reserves. This is not about stopping China. It's about securing cheap crude for US refineries while domestic production costs rise. The fossil fuel industry in the US is facing a long-term decline. EVs are growing globally. Renewable energy is getting cheaper. Oil demand is peaking. So what do you do if you're big oil? You secure a new supply at low cost, claim it's for national security, and keep the gravy train running for a few more years. Let's compare strategies. The US is spending military resources to control oil fields in Venezuela, a 20th century energy source, while China builds the 21st century energy infrastructure. We're fighting over the past. China is building the future. China's wind and solar capacity exceeds their fossil fuel capacity. Their EV market penetration is at 50%. Their fossil fuel power output is declining. Meanwhile, we're told that seizing Venezuelan oil is somehow a strategic victory against China. It's not. It's a subsidy for American oil companies dressed up as geopolitics. The Venezuela oil story isn't about stopping China. It's already moving on. It's about the American fossil fuel industry clinging to relevance while the rest of the world electrifies. They'll frame it as national security. They'll say it's about containing adversaries, but follow the money and you'll see the same playbook they've run for decades. Secure cheap resources, maintain market control, delay the transition as long as possible. The rest of the world isn't waiting. Neither should we. Well, that's it for EV News Roundup this month on Jim's EV Adventures. We say the things that everybody else is too afraid to say. We uncover the truth with facts and figures. The naysayers will troll the comments with their keyboard warrior nonsense and their cowardly hate. I'm not going anywhere in the face of their hatred and animosity. I'm going to be here tomorrow and the next day and the next day. If you appreciate the work that we're doing here on this channel, please consider subscribing. Like this video. Share it with all those EV naysayers that you know. This channel will always remain free. No memberships, no merchandise, just good old-fashioned fact-based information and perspectives on EVs and renewable energy that you will get nowhere else in social media. Have a great 2026, and I'll see you out there. or somewhere along the route from point A to point B. Take it easy, everybody, and I will see you all real soon with another episode of EV News Roundup.